Sandy, you should have been in radio. I'm not listening to you, not looking at you listening, that sounds like a radio voice. I decidedly do not have a radio voice. Perhaps it has always been hard to approach the Bible. We all hold so many different views of it, after all. Still, it bears saying again and again and again that the Bible was not written like a modern book, such as a novel, by one author over a stretch of months or even years. No, the Bible was composed as discrete books, each of them by different authors, or sometimes even multiple authors. And these books were written over the course of centuries, and sometimes centuries apart. In fact, the Bible is a finished product, something very much like what we have today, did not emerge out of history until 300 to 400 years after Jesus' death. Some believers, not based on any evidence at all, but from a position of dogmatic conviction, understand the Bible to be comprised of God's words, as though God dictated the Bible and the authors of the Bible simply wrote down what they heard God utter. Some other believers feel like the text must be divinely inspired, as though God urged its writers to put down only what God wanted them to write. Remember, neither one of these views is a view that the Bible itself expresses. These are human inventions, meant to inflate the Bible's authority in our lives. I understand the Bible a little bit differently. As I see it, the Bible remains a human production. In other words, like any other book, people wrote the Bible's books for other people to read. Moreover, the Bible was never part of a collective project. Instead, different writers produced different texts, like our gospel writers, for example. And these tend to represent the independent views of different early communities of believers. In the event that you disagree with the Bible, you aren't actually disagreeing with God. Instead, you disagree with the views of the biblical authors, who almost certainly did not get everything right. The words you read in the Bible generally are what particular people and communities believed, and derived some of these beliefs from different traditions about Jesus and his life and ministry. When someone speaks in the Bible, these are the words the author attributes to those people, including Jesus and God. Although none of the biblical writers, none of them, would have been present ever at any of the events they depict. Imagine if you wrote a historical novel or even a biography of the life of your great-grandparents or your great-great-grandparents. How well would it stack up against the lives your great-grandparents actually lived? The idea that we should read so much of the Bible literally, as though it is a collection of historical facts or a form of ancient journalism, continues to give us problems and headaches as readers. It's hard to support a more literal reading. It's best to take each book on its own merits. It's probably not a bad idea to think of the author of each book as being a little bit like us, if each of us decided to write a book of our own about our own experiences of our own faith and our own understanding of Jesus. Nothing we could write in such a situation would be lies as such. In fact, everything we wrote would be the truth as we understand it, although very little of what we wrote could be verified as factual. In the end, it's surely best to understand the biblical writers as sharing their convictions about Jesus and God. Although we must then be careful of the significant differences between convictions about the truth and the truth itself. Today we read from John, and we know John, whoever he was, loves the impact and power of symbolism. His gospel feels almost to be something built upon a foundation or a framework of symbolism. There's nothing wrong with that. Symbolism's roots reach deep into our human minds and hearts. Symbols speak to us. If you want someone to feel what you're hoping to convey, then symbolism might help. On the other hand, events in history do not unfold symbolically. Symbolism is artifice, it's craft, and symbols are literary devices designed to tell things that extend beyond the mundane occurrences of our lives. They are, in essence, interpretations of things, and not the things themselves. Today's passage might strike a reader as strange, and the more familiar you are with John's gospel, the more echoes you will hear in it from other tales and other events this gospel or other gospels describe. For example, the resurrected Jesus approaches his disciples as they fish from boats, just as the other Jesus calls them in the beginning in the synoptic gospels. There is the miraculous catch here, and another one very similar to it in Luke. In today's tale, 153 large fish were caught. Some scholars have posited that this unusual number might represent, symbolically of course, the number of people in this writer's original congregation or community. I find this a compelling, even an intriguing idea, although it is purely speculative. In the end, one more guess among many. In today's passage, Jesus has an extended discourse with Peter. He asks Peter 3 times whether or not he loves Jesus. "You know that I do," repeats Peter, growing increasingly exasperated. And Jesus responds with slight variations of, "Feed my sheep." This suggests strongly that to love Jesus means to care for, nurture, and nourish other people. Love shines like a particularly bright star in the constellation of John's gospel. Elsewhere he writes, "God so loved the world. If you love me, then you will keep my commandments. I give you a new commandment, that you love as I have loved you." And yet it's hard also to avoid the echoes of this scene and this dialogue with Peter's threefold denial of Jesus. This final chapter in John works hard to rehabilitate Peter as a leader in Jesus' movement. How do you reject your Lord forcefully and infamously so that every single gospel gives an account of it, and still you end up being chief among Jesus' band of followers? If nothing else, Jesus' grace here feels comprehensive. Scholars are in agreement that this last chapter in John constitutes an appendix, something that someone else added to an earlier text. Such a thing happens in Mark's gospel as well, where it ends inconclusively with terror and amazement. We know a second ending was added to Mark later, giving examples of sightings of the resurrected Jesus, because our oldest manuscripts contain only the first, unsatisfying ending, with no post-resurrection sightings. The second was added later to to give it a better, fuller, more orthodox conclusion, especially as Christian orthodoxy was beginning to take shape. Indeed, a third, and even more elaborately developed ending was added later still, so that the copies of Mark over time came to possess all three endings simultaneously and a bit awkwardly. John's final chapter here neatly ties up some loose ends, which we may or may not know or even recognize. We get yet another appearance of the resurrected Jesus to at least some of his disciples and a majority of the existing apostles. We get the rehabilitation of Peter, which I just described. Presumably, many earlier believers knew of Peter's denial, and this passage helps to shed a different light on such troubling facts, while at the same time demonstrating that Peter corrected his earlier mistakes. We also get clarification around the mysterious disciple whom Jesus loved. Tales in circulation asserted that he would not taste death, something Jesus promised him. It may be that by the time of the writing of John's Gospel, this disciple had grown old and increasingly feeble. Probably it appeared as though he did not have long to live, or he may have died already. Questions emerged about this tradition, and so the text states clearly that Jesus never said to him that he would not die, but if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? This plausible deniability sounds a wee bit aggravated, tired of defending a position grown difficult to defend. There's also the matter of docetism to address, which this additional chapter also does. Docetism was an early and extremely popular heresy. It argued that Jesus was not partially human at all. Such a thing was beneath God's dignity as a divine entity. Moreover, the physical world, with all its corruptibility, was no place for heavenly creatures. Greek philosophy was clear about this. No, Jesus only seemed to be human and to possess a human body and to have been crucified on the cross, all things beneath the dignity of any God. To seem in Old Greek is dokein, from which docetism takes its name. In the previous chapter, Jesus almost ostentatiously exhibits his wounded body, the way any of us might be happy to display our new, trim physiques after a rigorous and successful makeover. Seriously, the disciples literally put their hands all over Jesus. You might think, as I assumed, that a resurrected and glorified body, like Jesus's, would have had all its old mortal scars and wounds mended and erased. But this, too, is not about what really happened. It is intended to combat the claims of docetism, to prove that Jesus had a body and that it hung on a cross. In today's passage, the writer goes even one step further. Here, Jesus prepares a charcoal fire, roasts fish on it, and then invites his disciples to enjoy a meal with him. We might call it the Last Breakfast. All of this is meant, again, to demonstrate that Jesus indeed died, was raised, and still possesses a physical human body, one that must even eat. As you can see, this writer, consistent with this gospel, takes up theological concerns one at a time and puts them to rest, at least from his perspective. And this is his main concern. more so even than reporting the events of Jesus' life accurately and factually. Most of these concerns of late antiquity no longer concern us. So what can we take away from today's passage? Well, I would say that as much as we attempt again and again to return to what feels normal to us, Jesus calls us to be different and to do differently. The gospel should transform us as we attempt to live in conformity to it. We are to take risks. As do all people who choose to love, for love is inherently risky business. And we learn that Jesus deals graciously with us. We need look no further than his embrace of Peter again to see this. And there seems to be, at least to me, something cautionary as well in our passage. It seems to raise the question or to assert that among us people, there is the strange expectation that God's acts must always be fulfilled in our lifetime, when clearly God's timeline differs from our own. And finally, Jesus' return yet one more time, and his call to follow him yet one more time, encourages us to recall his ministry and our own. For we have all witnessed the difference that God's grace makes in the lives of real people who encounter acts of love and kindness done in God's name by God's people. Indeed, we could say the same thing of any of the Gospels. They invite us to share the difference Christ makes in our lives by striving to make a difference in the lives of others. May we work to succeed in such ministries and be such disciples of Christ. Amen.